Welcome to the Radiant Astrology Podcast, where we illuminate the wisdom of the cosmos for spiritual insight and soul-level healing. I'm your host, Christina Caudill. Thank you for joining me. Hello, this is Christina Caudill, host of the Radiant Astrology Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited about today's episode with my friend, the astrologer Tara Aal. And we discuss the Neptune archetype. We talk about Neptune transits, especially our own Neptune transits. We share some of our stories. So like the first 20 or 30 minutes, we're sharing our own stories. So hopefully you'll find that interesting and indulge us. But we also share some insights with how to navigate when you're having a Neptune transit, because Neptune can have some very specific challenges that can be hard to navigate if we're not aware of what Neptune wants from us. And I'll get to that in just a moment. I just have one brief announcement. The Emergence of Soul audio readings, they're individual readings where I offer a chart reading on the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and the nodes, how they affect your chart and your natal signatures. That is about to close on June 1st. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, head over to radiantastrology.com and you'll get all the details there. And I just want to read a beautiful client testimonial that I just received on one of my clients who received the Emergence of Soul reading. She says, "Such a graceful, careful, loving reading, accurate and insightful. I felt deeply understood without being judged. Adding the oracle card at the end made the reading complete. I was crying halfway through the interpretation of the card. It was so spot on. Amazing how much information you've extracted from the chart in such a short time. I found it to be a deeply healing and transformative experience. I wish I could return a hug to you, Christina. You embraced my chart with so much care, so much love, so much love." And this was from Natalia Manilova. Thank you so much, Natalia. I'm so glad you got such value out of this reading. This is really amazing work, just using the symbols of astrology to really look deeply at our lives and our potential. It's really beautiful. And this is a wonderful time to be doing so. You know, we still are headed toward the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and we really want to know what is our role and what is our potential in this majorly transformative time. And so again, you can visit radiantastrology.com. Sign up for my newsletter. If you do miss out on this special offer, I send offers whenever I'm doing them to the newsletter list, so you'll be first to be notified. So my guest, Tara Aal, she is amazing. And I'm just noticing her last name is Aal. It's A-A-L. And I was thinking, it sounds like all, right? And Neptune is about the all. It encompasses all of karma, all of our past and future lives. You know, it's like the ocean, it's the cosmos, it's eternal. So maybe subconsciously, she was the person I thought of to do this discussion with. She also just spoke at NORWAC, which was just this past weekend. Now, when we recorded this, it was just before she was headed to NORWAC. So we talk about NORWAC coming up. But NORWAC, which is the Northwestern Astrology Conference, it just happened. It happens every year, the end of May during Memorial Day weekend. And so that is always a really excellent and also fun conference to go to in the astrology world in Seattle. And at her talk there, she spoke about what we're going to speak about today. She talked about, I believe, the Pisces and Virgo axis. So in our talk, Tara and I focused mostly on Neptune and Pisces and that archetype, some of the challenges that we have faced personally, and also that we see our clients face if they're having a Neptune transit or have strong Neptune signatures. And I think what I really wanted to sort of bring this forward for illumination was because, first of all, everyone goes through the Neptune square when they're about in their early 40s usually. So it's when transiting Neptune squares your natal Neptune. And if we're not aware of it, it can just be this sort of underlying sense of either dissatisfaction or confusion, everything from not being in love with life anymore or just not really knowing what direction to take, to really maybe losing something that you thought was a dream, that you held onto as a dream. A loss of faith is something that we often see, and it can be either a faith, like literally a spiritual or religious faith, or faith in someone, or just faith in humanity in general. And, replacing a faith isn't a light thing to undertake. I mean, to actually put your faith into something, that's not something that can be just generated out of, I have an empty space in my soul, let me just fill it with whatever, which we can sometimes do with distraction, with addictions, with consumerism. And that usually is some way of artificially trying to replace our faith. And with Neptune, if we can be aware of when we're having a Neptune transit and the Neptune transits that affect us all collectively, then we can see more that at times the wisdom of Neptune is to let go of that which is maybe not appropriate at this time, something that maybe has given us faith, has been the wind beneath our wings, so that we can eventually find something that is more aligned with who we are and with our destiny. And so I really loved this talk with Tara. I just edited it and I didn't take out much. It's over an hour, but she is such an interesting woman to discuss astrology and just life in general with. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And with that, here is my discussion on exploring Neptune with Tara Aal. So, hey, Tara, thank you for coming back to the Radiant Astrology Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, Christina. Thanks for having me back. I'm very excited to be with you again here.
Great. Well, congratulations that you will be speaking at NORWAC again at the end of May.
Yeah, thank you. It's one of my, my teacher, my very first teacher, Laura Nalbandian, that is her conference. So that is my home. So I'm honored and excited to be there again as a speaker. Yeah.
And what are you going to be speaking on this time?
This year, the magical axis, which is the 6th and 12th house and the associated archetypes of Virgo, Pisces, and Neptune, and then Mercury.
Well, that's great because I wanted to have you on to talk like a little slice of that, because we were talking about how Neptune transits, how they can show up during times, some really pivotal times in people's lives. And I've actually had some experiences myself with Neptune transits that were very transformative in my life, and also seen them with clients. So I thought it would be great if we can kind of talk about how we've seen Neptune transits show up in our own lives and also in some client work as well. Does that sound good?
That sounds perfect.
Well, one of the first things is, we were talking about the Neptune square. So regardless of, where Neptune is in your chart and how it's aspected, usually the Neptune square, will experience some Neptune, which that usually happens, early 40s?
Yeah.
Usually. I had mine a couple of years ago, and it was like out of the blue. My husband and I ended up moving like right next to the beach, like literally steps from the ocean in Florida. What had happened was, we had an art gallery and we were closing it. And, we were just kind of done. We did it for like 13 years. And then we had this opportunity to move to a condo, like right on the beach. And there's something about having the ocean, like right at your back door. I just felt like I was in like Neptune territory in the all. And it was beautiful. And it was, at times it felt very incredibly serene and relaxing. But then there's also sometimes that can be really frustrating when you think that you should be on some timetable and in the earth realm, but you can't really get a grip. You can't really, make progress the way you want to, your timetable. I'm very Saturnian. So
Yeah.
time. So that's frustrating. But I look back at it as such a beautiful time. Luckily for me, it wasn't like devastating or anything. But for me, I found it to be a time where I was able to really just explore my spirituality, explore my identity, like release one identity and one even sort of path in life I thought I was on, and then just sort of open up to what was unfolding. So, what about yours?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm also very Saturnian. I have Saturn conjunct Mercury. Mercury is a ruler of my south node. Saturn is very, and I have Capricorn on the midheaven. So I'm with you in that territory. And for me, similar theme as you, but my Neptune square was end of November 2015. And that was right about the exact timing I had spent before I switched to full-time astrology and metaphysics. I was 22 years in healthcare as a compliance director and clinical practice manager.
Wow.
So I was very much in the world, and I worked at the university in the world of academia. And I just decided that wasn't the path I wanted to continue doing. And it was right before my Neptune square that I pulled out half my retirement, quit that career. And at the time I was living in Seattle. I'm a Seattle born girl. And I thought I was going to stay there. So I still had some connections there. I was working at a metaphysical bookshop, doing some things there. And then I met the love of my life. And it was literally right at that Neptune square that I decided to leave Seattle and move to be with him in Brooklyn, in New York. So the funny thing about time, you brought up time, like literally I checked out of my life. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that Neptune square, like it was the impetus to say, I need to be in a different space, a different time. And that was the first time since I was probably, 15 years old that I didn't have a regular job I was clocking into. So even my time schedule, when I woke up, when I went to bed, what I did, it was a very, very freeing period. At the same time, in addition to the freedom, there was a part of me that was, didn't quite know what to do with myself without the Saturn structure, like you, I mean, I'm used to that, but that's what's required, because I feel like with Neptune, it's in part, it's washing things away so you can become more real and authentic to who you are. But for me, it took a drastic change, right? I've never left my hometown.
So was there a sense of frustration at the time or just confusion, even though you knew you were following something that felt right? Was there
Yeah.
also something, surrounding it? Like, I just read a thing, Jeffrey Wolf Green, there was a book called Measuring the Night, Volume 1. I absolutely love it. It's,
Oh,
and he talks about some of the potential manifestations of the trauma of like the outer planets. And one of them, he said with Neptune, it can be like you're tuned into something that you have a sense is truth, but it's like being able to listen to a radio station and you hear the music, but nobody else does.
yeah.
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 And that's
Yeah.
the frustrating part, is when you know that, maybe some truth, some knowings come into your life, but nobody else gets it.
Yeah, it was. And I think for my family of origin, that leaving and that changing, even the whole career path thing was, there were some trials around that, around them not getting it, entirely. But for me, it was interesting because here I was, right? It's this like super romantic time. I moved, to the whole other side of the United States, coast to coast. And I'm in this like falling in love romantic period. And at the same time, for the first time in my life, I felt really alone. Not with my partner, but just in general in life. Like I just had this feeling of, where am I? And sometimes, honestly, even getting out of bed, like taking a shower, felt like it was a big accomplishment.
Wow.
It's like so much was going on inside of me. I realized I had spent so much of my life externally focused, and if anyone who spent much time with me, especially in the past, like I'm really like pretty regimented, like get up, go, get it done, work hard. I work a ton of hours, and during that period, I withdrew into myself. With my partner, I was totally present, but other than that, and so there was some confusion around where would I even go from there. Like it was like, who am I without my structure, and what structure would I want to rebuild, and would I ever even want any? There's a part of me, I wondered, like, how am I ever going to go back to like a regular anything after this? Like how does someone, kind of go through that change of letting it all fall apart and then coming back together. And I always think about Neptune as coming undone. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like you have to come undone. So yeah,
Unraveling.
complete unraveling. And also there's so much feeling, involved, emotion involved with that. For me, that transit is that when I stepped away from, the alarm clock goes off, I go to work, I focus on these projects, I see my clients, I had all this time to feel myself, and that wasn't always easy. There's a lot goes on inside of a person. and,
Yeah.
and when you don't have all the external distractions, and that's really what you're with all day long, you have a different relationship with yourself, which you can totally imagine why. I can totally get why people completely check out. It's a raw experience when most of your day, or even part of your day, everyone's life doesn't mean your Neptune square. Everyone doesn't, move away or move right by the ocean, right? People have less dramatic experiences, but I think there's still a part inside where there's a new sensitivity. It brings on a hypersensitivity.
Mm-hmm. And also the other sort of extreme is another thing that Neptune can be associated with is like anesthesia and numbing out, and sometimes that's people's way of checking out is they want to numb out because that can be such a sense of overwhelm when you're suddenly faced with all of, this new you that's emerging and you don't know what's happening. And one way of checking out is obviously we see Neptune associated with like drugs and alcohol and things like that, or just any kind of wanting to numb yourself out. And that can be, eating too much, doing too much internet, doing too much, whatever, where you aren't still and you aren't able to really hear, what's happening within and let that voice of yours and that change manifest on its own.
Yeah, and I always feel like, we're quick to say, don't check out, stay present. And, I am absolutely a supporter of being present in your life, but of course you don't want to go overboard with those things, but it's okay to have some compassion for yourself. Like sometimes in those times, like you can only so much at a time, so it's understandable where you might need to escape into music, or you might need to take a break because, only so much, sometimes I feel like only so much, sometimes bite-sized pieces is the way to go about it. So one thing for me that was just anything that's non-linear is really great during those times. Like anything that you've got going on with Neptune, honestly, even in your birth chart, if you have strong Neptune things, aspects or signatures, is to give your space to be in the non-linear. And that doesn't have to just be painting a painting. We tend to jump right to art with these things,
Right.
but there's lots of other ways to have those experiences, because what it does is it leaves room for that right side of your brain, and for your heart to receive things in a different way. And I feel like that part can be really, really supportive. And also, and in those realms, it doesn't have to make sense. In fact, it's not supposed to make sense. So there's a freedom in that.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, I think of it like when you wake up from a dream that just really meant something to you, it just felt so significant. But then when your mind tries to put the pieces together of, what it possibly could have meant, and you're not really grasping it there, that doesn't mean that something wasn't really, evocative within you and important to the soul. Maybe that's the soul's way of just purging or healing itself. And, things like music and poetry and painting, that they can be beautiful, but yeah, like you said, that's not where we have to go with it. I see so much that astrologers write that they say, well, this is a perfect time for spirituality, but spirituality is
everything.
I know. And it's also like to really open up to some real spiritual truths and knowing and integrating these, a belief that you feel is true to your soul. Sometimes that means you have to, hit a rock bottom or be at the end of your rope, or things fall apart, or, or maybe just this low grade depression suddenly becomes so everything's numbing, sometimes you can't like taste food, or you don't have your mojo, you don't like things, you don't have that libido, as they call it, the Jungians call it. And which may or may not have to do with sex itself. It's just that life force.
Yeah, it's a potency, because with Neptune there is and I don't mean this in a negative way, there's a natural passivity. There's a part of the call is to to accept and surrender. And I always think about the it's not, or let's use the words letting go. We talk about letting go all the time, right? Let go. And I think oftentimes we think about letting go of something. I think about the Neptune Pisces experience as letting go into something. And to me, that just brings a different level of it's a choice, but there is always releasing involved. So I'm not taking that out of the equation, but it's more of a choice to move into more. It's like if you were in the swimming pool, you'd be moving out of the kiddie and you'd be getting into the deep end. It's like you move into the next bigger section and the next more spacious area. And Neptune always wants to make more room, and more room for you to see more truth, more room to experience more things, more room to feel more things. But usually to be in a more spaciousness, the illusion has to dissolve of what you thought was your space or your container, which brings us back to your start with Saturn, right? Those things will take a new form.
And the whole idea of, idealizing things, it's like we may get a sense of that we've been holding on to these ideals, idealizing maybe our path or our destiny, or, what's it like to be a gallery owner, or idealizing what's it like to be a CEO of a insurance company, or whatever path you were on, And now, look, we're both on totally different paths than we were in our 20s.
Yeah.
Again, which isn't the prescription for everybody, but I know my reality is different now than it was before. And it's been infused with a trust in the universe. That's my path, sun in the 12th.
Yeah.
But that idealism, anytime we idealize something, there's going to at times be the disillusionment, that ideal dissolves. And I think that's part of the purpose of the Neptune square. And, it may or may not be something super, like you said, super devastating where everything changes, but something is meant to be washed away. Some dream, some idealism is washing away so that something more appropriate and more authentic can arise. You have space for it, as you said.
And sometimes it's just a perspective, but as we know, our perspective or our perception is our reality. So one little change of your perspective on life does change everything. So even if it doesn't look so drastic, let's just say if forever you held a certain thought or belief or pattern in your head, and this may be the period of time when Neptune comes in to wash it away, that changes, that in effect over time is going to change everything. So it's very powerful, even if you don't recognize it in the moment. Like let's just say if maybe for years I've sort of had this idea that I can't swim, it's just not something I can do. And if all of a sudden I decide, even if I don't try to do it, but if I just switch in my head, hey, I'm going to hold space for maybe I can do this thing, things are going to be different. And that's just a very small thing. But on a bigger scale, there are some of us who have tried to use our brains forever to figure things out in certain ways. And so we've made up these sort of equations to say, hey, if 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, then this can't work. And I think Neptune, in part, it really breaks down that logic, which is frightening because that's what we know. Like you can make up an example with a diet, right? Let's just say that we've told ourselves for a long time that I can't eat strawberries. And maybe you have a true allergy, so I'm not speaking about those situations. But maybe you've just got a thing going in your head for a long time that then has become your reality. And Neptune will bring up situations that will somehow challenge that, somehow reveal to you that maybe what you thought was true. Like, for example, here we look at a Neptune sort of sneaky thing. Maybe all of a sudden you eat something, you have no idea strawberries are in it, but it's loaded with strawberries. You just can't see it or taste it. And later on, someone tells you and you recognize that nothing happened when you ate the strawberry thing, right? That's an example of realizing I wasn't right about that. I wasn't accurate in my idea, which then changes everything, right? Your whole, shopping and meal planning can now include strawberries. And I'm just using that as an example, right? But you can extrapolate that to anything.
Yeah, because we often think of Neptune as being deception and illusion, which it can be, but then it can also be revealing truths or revealing where we've been in denial. I mean, I've seen as many people, actually, I think I've seen more people get sober during a Neptune transit than lose themselves in drugs and alcohol or whatever. And both are
are possible and potential. Because some people, and actually I forget who it was, but I think there was an astrologer who said that there were two people with like the same birth chart, and they were having like a Neptune transit. They didn't know each other. They just happened to, they were born on the same day or whatever, similar time. And at that same time, one was getting sober and another one was hitting rock bottom with an addiction. So it's like, I think Neptune can be where we're in denial, but it can also be if we're open, if we have just a little bit of opening to really wanting to accept the truth, then that I think can help us to really to have that great illumination there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Which is actually is very exciting. But there does have to be a certain level of trust. You talked about your sun in the 12th house, and I have Jupiter retrograde in the 12th house. So, we kind of share that signature as well, that things can be okay. That life is for you, right? And I think that there oftentimes during Neptune, there can be, so speaking of spirituality, sometimes when Neptune comes around, it does touch on kind of where we've put our faith as well. Jupiter can have a feel of that too, but Neptune does it as well. For me, they both share that piece. And so sometimes realizing that what you have believed in, sometimes that changes on a grand scale. Or on the flip side, you realize that you really do believe in something maybe that you hadn't before. But vision is such a big part of Neptune as well. Having some sort of a vision, which comes hand in hand with faith, right? I mean, Dane Rudhyar talks about how you can't have faith and hope without a vision. You have to be able to see that something could be different, or else those things don't exist. And part of what Neptune brings to our lives is that vision. And we talk about it being vision for the future, but I feel like it's more of an expanded present. Just our human mind likes the idea of future, but it's more that there can be more now, which is a huge bringer of hope.
I think where some of the frustration can be around is, if you are tuned into a knowing, but just have no idea how to actualize it, the actualizing it is the Saturn part, and we just have to let Neptune do its thing. I mean, I can think of probably so far, the most difficult Neptune transit I had was there was a point where Neptune was transiting my ascendant. My sun and ascendant. Right. And that was when I was in college, actually. And this is the thing. I was a really good student. I mean, I was a straight A student from like pre-K up until about ninth grade. And then high school was a little, having to adjust, whatever. I got okay grades in high school. But then I got into college under a scholarship, but I had to have my grades up really high. And that first year, Neptune was right on my ascendant, and I just couldn't keep up with life. I just couldn't, I just was like constantly, I was partying too much was one. But I also felt like I just couldn't keep up with my life, with, just where I had to be when or whatever. And later, years later, looking back and seeing that was Neptune on my ascendant. What ended up happening was my grades plummeted that first year, and I had to bring them up. Otherwise, I would lose my scholarship. Even though it was hard, I just poured all of my will into doing what I could to prioritize my grades. And I was able to do it, but it almost felt like it was happening to me. Like I was watching a movie or, playing a video game and like, and that phrase you said about feeling checked out, that's one that I've heard people say that have strong Neptune signatures, or if they have, Neptune conjunct the sun or something, maybe one of the parents, the father or whoever, or, the Neptune, sun and moon signatures can sometimes be a parent who was checked out in some way.
Yeah, that can be, addiction, but also can be mental illness is common, because there can just be like, it's funny with Neptune, oftentimes the person, even ourselves, is there, but there's nobody home. It's like this, I don't know, I have so much Neptune happening in my chart right now. Neptune has just gone over my Jupiter in the 12th house.
Yes, I was going to ask you in the 12th. I had to ask you about that because Neptune and Jupiter are so similar. They're co-rulers of Pisces.
Yeah.
When you were talking about that Neptune, you left everything behind and we're starting a new life. Sometimes that can be like a Jupiter thing too. A lot of times,
Absolutely.
seeking freedom, seeking new horizons. Yeah. So can you give us a sense of
Yeah.
what Neptune or Jupiter was like?
Yeah, and just to give you a little bit of, so my Jupiter is like a V point in my chart. It's the ruler of my north node. It's square my nodes. It's the handle of my bucket, and it's retrograde, and it's in Pisces in the 12th house. So if you ever wondered what direction I'm going, it's, it's not to leave Saturn behind, but it's definitely to move from that world more to the, the other. So that being said, it's already hitting on things that are big triggers for me. But what's interesting right now is that sort of checked out. It's not that I'm checked out, but even physically, I drop things, like I'll walk to a room to do something. I'm like, oh, I go to hang out my robe, but I go to a different room, not where the hook is, like those kinds of things. So like there's this very much, in some ways I feel like heart-centered wise, I feel like I'm with myself more than ever, but my mind, I can't even necessarily remember. I have a very sharp memory, but I find myself testing myself because just common things like names or things that I know, like they don't just come right to the surface. And I've been preparing for my lecture at NORWAC. And I mean, I've given lots of presentations, not just in astrology, but years before that in other areas of my work. And I kind of know how I work, I'm pretty organized and things come together and make sense. And I got to tell you, like, I would just sit staring at the computer, and then I had all these slides and I read them, and they were like, the order was just abysmal, I tried to reshuffle them. And,
Wow.
and I think it's great because I'm trying to hold space for myself here, and I can share that in my lecture too. But I feel like it's my mind, my mind needs to let go. And to do that, I don't know what the new order will be, but there definitely is this strange, like, loss of myself for who I thought I was, and even what I think that I have been wanting, that piece is coming up as well. So, but it is interesting at times, and sometimes I feel emotional. So sometimes, it's not like I have some big crying fit, but I'm moved to tears easily. I mean, I'm a Cancer, so it already happens pretty easy anyway. But I'm more moved to tears, and even the way I'm looking, as like I'm driving, I'm looking at the trees on the way to work or something, and I'm just seeing them differently. So this is really the best way I can say it. I feel like in some ways for me, my senses are sort of realigning from a different place. And I have no idea where that's going to go. I don't know what that means for my work, but I do know that it feels like the most true developing of me that maybe I have yet to, that I've ever experienced in my life. And that part's exciting.
Yes.
It's like permission to not get everything put together. And
that is, oh my God, that's so important, is giving yourself permission. So as I said, that one of the reasons I want to talk to you about this is some of the people that I see with my client work that are the most frustrated are having like a Neptune transit and are probably, earth signs.
yeah.
And it's important, I think, giving yourself permission, just allowing, because the thing is the allowing. I mean, Neptune and all the outer planets, in fact, prove to us that life is bigger than us.
Yeah.
The universe is bigger than us because there's something bigger than us that's coming in to influence everything from our mind to, events in our life to even our desires or urges.
Yeah.
And we need to let it happen. The danger is blaming ourselves for not being on time, not getting toward our ambition, not blah, 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 these things.
Yeah.
And also to me, whenever I hear people say, oh, you got to ground, you got to stay grounded and ground. I mean, yeah, granted, like maybe there's times in your life where, you've got to pay the bills on time or you've got to do these little things. But I think grounding too much is denying what is trying to happen through you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so one thing that can be helpful is, and this is from my personal experience, it's funny, I made this shift, like in so many ways. I'm a Pluto 6th house person, like I'm a control freak. And I've moved in this space of like, I don't balance my checkbook anymore. I wash my hair only twice a week. I mean, literally like all these like sort of things you mentioned earlier about Neptune and people sometimes even stopping taking care of themselves. It's true. But not at a deeper level. So what can be really helpful though is to make a list or find some way to make sure that you do the critical things, right? Because you don't want to just let everything go down the drain. You still need to pay your bills. You still need to, brush your teeth, whatever. But so if you set up some sort of a healthy structure for those things that need to be taken care of, then you can let yourself off the hook for the rest. And I feel like during those transits, you need to do that. You need to find out what happens when you're not under the influence of your own kind of control mechanisms. And as human beings, we have so many of those. And it can be scary and it can be confusing, and you can feel like, you have no idea what you're doing or even what you're saying. Like if you're used to being super organized and having, all the information together, or if you're used to never, missing a detail, and then all of a sudden at your job, you recognize that everything looks a little hazy. It can be frightening, but the exciting side, I feel like, is, okay, what actually comes next? And with Neptune, one of the things that I always take comfort in is that there's supposed to be fog. Like Neptune is the fog, and it will clear. And, Lara Nalbandian in our classes used to always say, and there will never be a more crystal clear moment than when the fog clears. But you have to wait for it. You can't push Neptune.
That's beautiful. Yeah, there will never be a more crystal clear moment than when the fog clears. Yeah. And after my Neptune square, I really missed it because that was such a mystical time, really, also. And it's funny because I was going through my progressed moon in Aries at the same time.
Wow.
That's when I was like building my business and doing all these courses and But then, and I would do them. I would have like, I think of a progressed Aries moon as like driving an ambulance, like I put so much energy into, doing a webinar and then just completely unravel after that for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It was like, I did something this month.
Well, yeah, because Neptune there's a nature of Neptune to care on a really deep level, like to care about, people's well-being and to care about, love and compassion and all these things, but to not care about the rest of the stuff, and so it's so antithetical to that sort of attention to I've got to do. Krishnamurti, in his book Freedom from the Known, he says, he asks people, he says, do you want to know my secret? He's like, my secret is I don't care what happens next. And I feel like that's also one of the things we can embrace with Neptune. As long as you are present, when I mean present, I mean like, with yourself, you know that you are showing up the best you that you can be. And, with Neptune, there's not a need to worry about anything else because Neptune is never anything but the moment. That's sort of the magic or the kaleidoscope of it, is that it's all things happening at once. There is no separate things. And so I remind myself of that a lot. And, this also comes back to, to attachment lessons, right? Neptune teaches us to not be so attached.
Yeah.
Which is the ultimate freedom, right? If you're not attached to things, think about what you've just created for yourself.
Yeah, because a lot of times during a Neptune transit, so what do we see? Somebody gives all their stuff away. All of a sudden, I need all this stuff. And, it's great. You give it to charity or you give it away or just kind of create space because you suddenly feel everything's cluttered, or you give of yourself.
Yeah.
You give of yourself to others, to helping others, even to the point of depletion. But there's only so far you can go is when we're depleting ourselves, even for a good cause.
Yes.
So I think that's where because a lot of it, especially in evolutionary astrology, we look at the polarity. And so like you were saying, like it sounded like the Virgo polarity is the having some rituals in place, having just enough structure, because we talk about the light and shadow of the Neptune Pisces archetype. Well, I think, with the opposite, the Virgo can be the grounded, can be the, that sense of responsibility, that sense of containment that's necessary. Yeah. But then I think the shadow of that is also like meaninglessness. If you're just constantly trying to prove your perfection, trying to cross all your T's and dot your I's, but then there's no soul behind it. To me, that's the Neptune and Pisces job,
Yeah. And Christine, I use that word meaningless just just the way that you do, and I also add joylessness. Like when we get too stuck in the Virgo perspective, we lose joy. Everything becomes a task, and everything becomes something to improve. We miss the beauty of everything as it is, and And we all have that beauty, right? And so Neptune is the reminder, I think, of that.
So what can you share maybe in your client work? Like, is there like sort of something that you see come up and you maybe have some insight around how people can navigate when they're having difficulty with a Neptune transit?
Yeah, I think of all the things, it's the most difficult to articulate, right? And so I think that that's a good place to start, meaning it's totally understandable if you can't even fully explain what's going on with you, and that's okay. So this kind of comes back to the permission that we were talking about, the permission to feel lost, right? That you don't have to have it all together. And the nonlinear piece I talked about is really useful. So for some people, that is just free form writing, where you just sit down and let things just flood out of you. For some people, it's drawing, and it doesn't have to be creating something, beautiful for the wall. It can just be simply sitting down and working with your hands. Finger paint is great. You don't need to be making a work of art that you're going to show off, but letting the part of you express that isn't attached to trying to explain, problem solve, or get things exactly right. The other thing about Neptune in the 12th house in general is it's linked to horses. So anybody who has any connection or has any love of horses, going to a horse therapy workshop can be amazing. Taking riding lessons can be amazing. Just simply going and spending time, go out to a stables or go out to a field, being around horses, because there's something about the frequency of a horse that really links into that energy as well. You mentioned being by the ocean. I mean, that's part of it too. And if you can't get to the ocean or by water outside, get in the bathtub. It's like,
Oh yeah.
It's the water element. So giving yourself, being, feeling your own flow, I guess, is part of what I feel with Neptune, right? Sometimes that means, maybe if you can, Neptune also is linked up with periods of reflection and solitude and respite. It's also with Neptune and the 12th house in Pisces in general, it's giving yourself time to heal, right? The polarity or sixth house Virgo action is that, working it into perfection, as if perfection were a real thing. But I'm just using that as a, as a statement here. But on the Neptune Pisces 12th house side, it's giving yourself a timeout. So sometimes that means whatever, maybe you can take a little sabbatical from your job if it's possible. Maybe it just simply means on the weekend, if you have a weekend or whatever day you have off, maybe you dedicate that to not having to do something. Because I feel like Neptune, its magic in part arises when you're not trapped in something. So it could be a walk in nature, could be drumming, could be meditating. There's lots of ways to do it. But I feel what's important is to somehow free yourself of the structure. That's really, I think, is the most useful thing. And the other piece is that this idea of meaninglessness, hopelessness comes in with Neptune stuff, confusion, sometimes even a giving up, right? Neptune is very much linked with giving up.
Well, it's also like what we didn't really touch on, and we talked a little bit about depression, but grief, and it could be some grief that hasn't been addressed before that now is really needing to be addressed.
Yeah, which is again that time for healing. It is giving yourself that space, but there's always this fine line between, if someone is really seriously depressed or really having thoughts, about ending their lives. I mean, that requires a different kind of attention, right? But most of us going through Neptune transits on some level are going to question, what's the meaning of my life?
Yeah.
That's normal. And so those little moments of depression, depression, when it hasn't gone into a point where it really needs treatment, it's meant to slow you down and to make you aware that something, is not in alignment with you. And that's a useful tool. And sometimes we have to sit in that space, for a little while to really kind of feel it out. Like, in other words, sometimes first we just feel disillusioned, right? So think about the Neptune square happens around the early 40s, right? So it's kind of like a midlife crisis, if you will. And it's interesting because it comes, close to the Uranus opposition too, so we're kind of getting this, tag team of, what am I doing here? Is it really what I meant to do? And then on a bigger level, like, is there any meaning at all? And especially when
Yeah, because like loss of faith is a, kind of key phrase with Neptune transits. But that can be huge because when you put your faith into something, that's putting your meaning for being, the meaning of everything. And when something happens and that's lost or you just can't access it anymore, that can be very disorienting.
Well, yeah, totally. And you even can feel at some points like, if you lose faith in humanity, you lose faith in, everything seems hopeless, right? I mean, look at the state of the world, look at the planet, look at people, and especially those of us who get to be in our 40s, it's oftentimes the first realization that actually everything has kind of already been done. We're just all inventing new versions of doing it. And so there can be this sort of, the illusions fall away that, that I'm going to be this spectacular. Sometimes we had these visions of grandeur, right? Something was going to be so magical or this thing was going to happen. And it's interesting because actually there is even more magic to be found. It's just of a different kind. And so so it's not that we're losing magic. It's just the way we thought it was going to happen. It's different. And we get a little bit older and life happens and we start to see things differently. And then a Neptune transit happens. And then sometimes it takes us down to our knees. But that may be the point where in our own desperation or our own despair, we then realize how we really want to make a difference in the world, or where our heart really is leading us, or if everything really feels hopeless, maybe that's because the way we've been focusing all of our energy is putting a bunch of effort into something that doesn't matter to us anyway. And then what a wonderful thing to take a break, take enough time so you can heal, recover, get yourself back, reclaim your innocence. This is so much Neptune as well. It's the innocence and the wonder of what life can be. But it takes some time to get ourselves back to that place. But then after that Neptune transit, there's just this, sometimes, for example, you and I, we know, our lives look differently afterwards, but I really think even sometimes just the amount of compassion you have might change, because when you've gone through your own struggles of, I don't know what has meaning, maybe you lost your faith, whatever it looks like, you then have a new compassion in life and you're more available then to meet the people in your life, in a place. And we know Neptune rules compassion. We know Neptune rules forgiveness. We know Neptune is about acceptance. So part of the Neptune process is accepting our own feelings of weakness, accepting our own feelings of helplessness, accepting that we are, there's only so much perhaps that we can do. Maybe what we thought we could do is not realistic. Maybe what we thought the world would offer us is not realistic. But in that process, we then also become aware of what is possible. And that to me is where, the real positive influence comes in.
Yeah, I think, during this time, like we said at first, you'll probably want a lot of alone time. I mean, I think that when there's too much of this Neptunian influence, sometimes, just life, it just gets overwhelming, or just the noise of the collective, that can start to like come into your own mind. And you need space from that. And, there's no real shutting it out. You can't build a wall in the middle of the ocean,
No.
And so it is that sort of taking an approach of ease to life, easing into life. I think even just in this overstimulated society, even though we think it might be relaxing to have no noise and just be by yourself, gosh, sometimes when we are alone, all the noise that's been happening in our minds gets really loud and we just want a distraction from that. But really, I think the work is to know that only by going within and by meditating or quieting the mind or coming to some kind of awareness of the self, that we don't need all of these voices. And a lot of times these voices that are happening within our mind aren't even ours. We were born into a conversation, or there was something someone said to us once that keeps firing off. And I think that these Neptunian times can help us to maybe discern what is ours and what's not really ours.
Yeah, and I think attuned to a new frequency. I feel like that's a real Neptunian thing. Like there's a, if you like the terminology, higher frequency, but just different frequency. And the thing about, I practice the tarot as well as astrology, and the Hanged Man is the Neptune card, and the Hanged Man, of course, is the god Odin who discovered the runes, but he's hanging upside down on the world tree, and he's hanging upside down. And in Norse mythology, he was, he got snared up and hung upside down from this tree. And after he, and his, he couldn't free himself and he was stuck upside down. And it was during that period of being upside down that he downloaded basically, the magical runes, like the mystery of the runes. And,
Oh, wow.
And so Neptune is all about what happens if you let yourself be totally upside down, hung up, out of your own control, but then how do you see your world? And so it's disorienting, but at the same time, what really is up and down? Do you know? Like, this is the thing, like, what is backward or forward? All these things with Neptune become, up for a rediscovery. And so there's definitely, I mean, we think like in life, right? We tend to always have the same orientation towards things. But can you imagine actually if you always walked with your feet on the ceiling? I mean, you really would, life would be entirely different to you. I think what you would see, and this is in part, what that card and why it links with the Neptune is that it requires surrender. When life has got you tied up by the legs upside down, what's the best thing you can do? Surrender and see what actually comes in that space. And let's also not forget dreams, because I always encourage.
Oh, yeah.
I always encourage my clients, like, this is the time. And if you are an artist, don't waste it. Yeah. Any kind of an artist, right? Because Neptune moves slowly. You won't have these aren't going to keep coming again, like a Mars return. So when you're in these periods with Neptune, like if it's painting you love, paint. If it's music you love, create music. Like if it's nature you love, do that, because the energy is so available to you. The inspiration is so available to you for anybody, but especially if you're inclined in that way. And any dreams, the dreams that you have, it's like, it's not that you have to actualize them at that moment, but write them down, draw them out, make a dream board, make a vision board.
The thing with dreams too is something that just is so powerful is active imagination. So if you had a dream and it just really impacted you, and maybe you have some fragments of it, but then you don't know what it really meant, then you go into a space of like meditation and you bring that dream forth, the image. And rather than controlling it or whatever, you just allow the images to unfold, to have a life of their own, to speak to you, to see what was it that they were trying to say, and even ask them, characters in the dream, what do you want from me? Or what do I need to know? And it's pretty amazing how that can really, really speak to you, especially during Neptunian times.
Yeah, because your psychic channels are open. Like, do you know, like if you're someone who's into developing your psychic abilities, that is prime time. I mean, it could be like the time that you recognize that you have a gift. Maybe you're clairsentient, you didn't know that you were. That can come forward. But Christina, as you were talking about that meditation with the dream, the other powerful one, in addition to that I love to use, is the waking meditation. Where you actually look at your whole day as a dream. So like, as you're going through your day and things are happening, look at it as though it were a dream. And so the encounter you have with the person at work, whatever happens with the barista, in your car, like look at all the things that are happening as symbols as though they were a dream. And that also gives you a whole different perspective.
Neptune will be trining the North Node.
Oh, yeah.
From like May 17th through for a couple of weeks, I think, or how long? Yeah, through about beginning of June. Something I love to just play around with in some of my metaphysical groups. If there's some kind of Pisces, transit, or then I'll say, did anybody have interesting dreams last night? And people will be like, yes, oh my God, how did you know? Because it does. I mean, it just opens those channels, and it has a potential to be opening the collective channels when Neptune is in hard aspect to a personal planet or something. And in this case, the North Node. So with the North Node being in Cancer and, the sign of the feminine.
Yeah.
maybe what's the feminine collective dream?
Mhm.
And maybe there is a dream that needs to be purified and cleansed, and maybe there's some disillusionment that needs to come up that washes away so that we can get really clear on where
Maybe,
we're headed. I don't know.
maybe it's even on the feminine itself. What is the feminine? It could be even there could be awarenesses that that we don't have yet. And with both Neptune and Cancer, there's a lot of healing energy in that as well, healing opportunity.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a beautiful combination, really.
Cancer, nourishment,
Yeah,
care, a belonging, all of these things that ultimately Neptune can elevate,
yeah.
us to, like you said, like a higher frequency, or a frequency that is more authentic to what we're attuned to.
Well, yeah, and just that we're all children of the universe, that unifies us, and that's a belonging that can't ever be changed, and so realize, we can't, go and sit on the universe's lap the way we can, moms, but there definitely is, that's something that brings us together. And I think that's something that's missing today too, right? In general, I mean, we there's still so much segregation, there's still so much of division, right? We even with our activism, which, this is not a statement for or against it. I'm just saying, even with that, it draws lines. And ultimately, Neptune doesn't draw lines at all. Neptune is as inclusive as it can be. It means everyone's part of the family.
I really like to pay attention to when Neptune stations,
Mhm.
because those are always some major collective experience event. I remember when was it? The end of 2017. That was when all of those immigrants coming from Syria, I believe, came into, was it Germany? And they opened their borders because there was nothing. I mean, they felt like it was just so overwhelming. And it was just like a sea of people who were fleeing war coming in, just overwhelming the system there. And that happened at a Neptune station. Another Neptune station was when there was that attack in Paris. I think it was the Bataclan one. And people all over the world then were grieving. Then also the Pulse attacks was then. I mean, they're not always this violent or whatever things, but they're just some that came to mind that I remember thinking, oh wow, it was right on the Neptune station that the
Yeah.
Pulse attacks happened, and we were all suddenly. It was not, there was no division. People were taking to the streets, doing visuals all over
Yeah.
the world, really, especially America, because of, the grief and the sorrow and that feeling that we were all affected in some way.
Well, and it's always tragic, those kinds of things, but grief does tend to bring us together, which is kind of reinforces that Neptune piece. But as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, of course, Neptune always carries the theme of being overtaken by forces greater than ourselves, and so any of those types of things. I mean, with Neptune, it's like when you're in the ocean and it's a giant storm and it just sweeps you away. That's the kinds of things that that can happen with Neptune. And so I think all the things you were describing to me were like physical, actual, on this planet, actual, tangible
Mhm.
actualizations of that energy.
I often liken it to like an undertow. I mean, I grew up in Florida, like on the beach anyway. So like,
Mhm.
we always had to watch out. What happens when you get caught up in an undertow? And, there's usually at the beach, they have some advice, some tips that you don't want to swim against the current.
Right,
Because
right.
you're just going to exhaust yourself and you're not going to get anywhere. The other thing is it's like you relax into the movement of the ocean, but you keep one eye on the shore.
Mhm.
That's not the same thing as you got to ground, because
No.
you're not going to be able to fight where the movement of the ocean is going, but you can, not fight against it, but also just try not to lose sight of the shore entirely.
Yeah, which to me is like, at least my belief on this planet is while we are all interconnected, we all are also a separate self. So with Neptune, the idea is not to entirely lose yourself. The idea is to become more inclusive as yourself, and so as you were saying, keep your eye on the shore. It's the same thing, you keep part of yourself rooted in yourself while you experience those greater things. And we were talking earlier, I think you talked about selfless service, which really definitely comes up, volunteer work, all kinds of giving of oneself with Neptune. But we talk about selfless service, right? Or we talk about these things, but you can't serve without a self. It really doesn't exist. And so I feel like this is that, the one spectrum of energy that is, the Virgo Pisces together, is there is the self in service of the greater. There's the higher self and there is the lower self, right? But none of these things exist without the self. So I'm completely agreeing with you in that keeping some rootedness with the self is important, because that's the best that you have to give. And that's how you're actually experiencing all the things.
And what makes me think of is, so with Venus, goddess of love and relationships, she is supposedly exalted in Pisces.
Mhm.
But Venus, Pisces, Neptunian type of, relationships, I often see, a yearning, or, for either an unrequited love or an idealized love or something. It can be a love that just can't be contained in a typical relationship. All that
Yeah.
relationships require, me and my desires meeting you and your desires, because there's something else that happens. And a lot of times these type of relationships that are Neptunian, sometimes they can't really be,
I don't know, that to me,
what's the word when you consummated. Sometimes,
consummated or even realized on this
yeah.
in human form. Like, it becomes such a spiritualized relationship, but then we are still in human bodies, and we have to actually, we're still living our human lives. So
And sometimes trying to fit it in, a sexual relationship or a
yeah,
typical whatever, I
yep,
give you this, you give me that. It
yep.
doesn't work because, again, it's on a different frequency, and we start to
Mhm.
make it wrong. I mean, we see, I don't know if you see it when people have like twin flame kind of
Yeah,
things,
oh, yeah. But
and
I have my own opinion about that.
it can be confusing and frustrating when we try to make them into something that they're not. Maybe for some people, maybe we're just meant to love them either from afar, or our spirits love each other, or our souls are married on some other plane. I think it's just opening up the imagination can contain some real truths to it, because our limited society and how we're used to doing relationship can't contain the bigness of Neptune at times.
No, absolutely. And I don't know if you found this as well, but what I see oftentimes with Neptune, when it comes to either in combination with Venus or other relationship signatures, is there's a tendency, to over idealize, and then to not see someone for who they really are. So this to me comes down to, with this sort of spiritualized Neptune sense, right? So it's like, let's say, you and I fall in love, but what I really tune into is your soul or your higher self, right? And so I can see all this potential and all the beauty, but what I fail to see is who you are in your human incarnation. Like,
Mm.
it's not accepting who someone is in the real moment. It's only seeing what they could be, their greatest potential, if you would be. And nobody wants to be loved for their potential. That's painful, right? We want to be loved for who we are now as we are. And so I think there's this, danger sometimes with the Neptune energy, and it doesn't mean it's not true, right? Like, there is a part of us, of course, that is spirit, and it doesn't mean that all that potential and possibility is not there, but it's not very useful in our human experience to ignore what's actually going on now. And so I feel like
Or to blame the other person for not living up to
yes,
what
for what they
is.
could be.
Yeah. What Jungians believe is that, when we have these idealized projections on a loved one, or someone that we're putting up on a pedestal, that usually is an expression of something that's within us, our own potential that we haven't owned. And we look to someone that we project like an inner movie, and they are the screen, that we
Mm-hmm.
project this image onto them, when it's actually an inner image that exists with us. That's what they talk about a lot of times, the inner image.
Yeah.
And, once it falls off that other person, because they can't possibly, it isn't
Yes.
them, then we get disappointed, and we, are disillusioned or whatever. But and at times that disappointment delusion can be helpful when we can pick up that projection and realize that it actually belonged to us the whole time. And that's something for us to live up to. So whatever it is we feel like we love in this other person, that actually is something that we are meant to embody.
Yeah, that's even in my own personal life. For a long time, I always would choose a wounded artist. That was my type, right? And then I always wanted to like support that artist so they could really create their thing. And then, a number of years ago, I had a realization that I am the wounded artist, right? And then I was able to like embrace that for myself. And I'm still very attracted to artists, but in a different way. I'm not looking to like save. Here's the thing too with Neptune, right? The savior complex is such a big piece of it. Either I need to save you or other people, or I'm looking for someone to save me. And that
The victim mentality.
Yeah, all of that comes into, right? And generally, whatever we're trying to save is really the part of us that needs saving. And Neptune can help us, tune back into that spot in ourselves so we can do that for ourselves, which is really a very, very empowering thing. But it can come through some very difficult times, when you feel like what your hope and savior was, maybe it is your relationship, maybe it's your job, maybe it's your religion, whatever the thing is that you were looking to, when that crumbles away, can be really frightening. But at the same time, how exciting to recognize that you're not missing that thing inside you.
Yeah. And then how beautiful to discover it within you. Like what you were saying, when the fog lifts, the clarity is like like no other clarity.
Yeah. And then you know which way to go. It's like if you're driving a car and it's foggy and you can't tell where to go, and it clears, and all of a sudden, and that's what I feel like when you're patient through the process, when you give yourself permission to not dot all the I's and cross all the T's, or to try different things, even let yourself maybe out of the time constraints you normally have, whatever it is you do to loosen all that up. Then you get on the frequency of being able to recognize the signs that were always there, for the places where, you can best serve, the places where you can most be you, the places where, that are really in alignment with who you are, and the people and the places and the experiences where, where you can really kind of come alive. And so I think that's maybe one of the biggest gifts of these Neptune transits.
Yeah. And it can also be so magical at times too, like magical and beautiful. And I think about when, when we had that Mercury retrograde in Pisces, I can imagine what it did to your chart, since you said you're very material and everything. It was, in Pisces, and I think it's stationed direct on Neptune, and it was all.
I was in India. It was crazy, but
that's right. Because I was going to say, I was in Europe at the time, and I was like, oh my God, it's going to be crazy. I'm probably going to miss all my trains and my hotels and stuff. But I actually didn't. It was the most magical, beautiful trip. It was like the whole thing was like a dream.
Yeah.
It was amazing. What about you?
I feel the same way, but I went into it knowing, I was like, I'm letting go of expectations. I'm gonna show up. And really, some odd things happened. We couldn't get some of the transportation we wanted. Some things fell through, but it didn't matter
when they fell through, was it replaced by something?
Yes, yes, and not just interesting, like very mystical things.
Mystical, okay.
Yeah, I mean, like at one point we were, in Rishikesh, which is the yoga capital of the world, and we were on the way to the Beatles ashram, and
wow,
we were just down this little cobblestone street, and they were having a funeral, which is basically just like the body is out in the middle of the street, and the few of the the family or neighbors are there, and I mean literally the body is right there, and they're like breaking this big clay vat of water. You can't walk by because it's this ritual and these things where you think you can't time this. It was like at that moment, that minute, and there's that experience of of a transition, which is very Neptunian, and there's the people in the street, and it was very beautiful, and on the way to this magical place. So we just had so many. I saw the Himalayas for the first time with my naked eye. There's just these, that even who we met, in these random moments was very magical. And it's funny, at one point I said to my partner Darren, we, because people ask, or how was the trip, or we're both photographers, so we took photos, but not as much as normal. And Darren looked at me and he said, he said, this really has been more of an internal journey. I was like, absolutely. And how do you even tell someone about that? That to me, those are those Neptune moments where it's beyond words. And that's the awesome thing about it. You just, you have the image, you have the moment, the experience, the feeling, but you'll like I just tried to articulate something for you, but I can't, not the way it was. It's impossible. And
but I get it. I
yeah,
feel it.
and for me, I love those moments. Those moments throughout my life are the highlights of when I feel, the most connected, and just, it's beautiful. So yes, but this also speaks to this being willing to let go, because if I had been if this had been 10 years ago and I had been my normal control freak tendencies, it might have been a very different story.
Mm-hmm. I just noticed because so Jupiter also has that that Piscean invite. Jupiter, and as we said, Jupiter and Neptune are co-rulers of Pisces, and they've been in a square, like kind of on and off, like within a couple of degrees, like kind of mostly this year. It's going to happen again. I just noticed. I thought that was over, but nope, it's happening again.
Wow.
I don't think it's going to get exact. Well, in June it's going to be really tight, because when Neptune stations retrograde, it will be at 18 and 43 minutes of Pisces, and Jupiter will be at 18 Sag. So, they won't get to the exact minute, but they are to the degree all through June. So June's going to be an interesting time for some, we'll really get that Neptunian vibe, I bet.
Yeah, and Christine, I don't know how you, but I don't know how you look at this, and I would love to hear. But because there's so many similarities with Neptune and Jupiter, but one thing that I feel is very different. So when I'm looking at the square, like I think what's the challenge going to be? What is the challenge of something needs to come apart and come back together? And for me, so much of that has to do with Jupiter being personal truth and Neptune being universal truth. There's something in that which for many of us could tap into, or even just our country or the world in general, that Jupiter and Sag can be very much have a self-righteousness.
Oh yeah.
And I think that Neptune and Pisces there's a bigger picture, people. And unless everyone fits in it, that's not Neptune land, and Neptune has the upper hand in that aspect. Right. So,
well, it's interesting because they're both in their own rulership, and we've seen it earlier this year too. What I get from these two challenging one another, my first thought is, if you don't believe in something, you can fall for anything. Number one. But also, as you said, Jupiter and Sag can be very self-righteous and can be the evangelical. The evangelical force that again, if we can't be seeing clearly, which when it runs up into the Neptune and Pisces, it can be both being illuminated by some great truth that helps us to see a new possibility. That's one potential. Or it could be that challenge of, somebody's truth versus what is actually real. It could be the gaslighting even. It can be not knowing what the truth is.
And the lies, the lies can come out.
Mm-hmm.
Or even, and personally, it could be the ways that we're living a lie. Do you know what I just mean? It's mean collectively and individually, but I feel like this idea, with Sag, oftentimes, just in general, we look at the energy of, are we living according to our own nature, right? Or have we been living on some level the life of a lie? Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about that a lot, about that type of energy. And so sometimes in that process, we're actually uncovering where we recognize, oh my gosh, that wasn't true for me. And then on a grander level, and it's not true, maybe we now discover it's not true at all.
Mm-hmm. And when we look at some of the shadow of Sag can also be xenophobia or foreigners, seeing other people as different, or just exotic and strange and just different from me. Whereas Neptune and Pisces is there to remind us that we all share humanity, but if we make ourselves different from others, or fear others because of their difference, then we're not living in accordance with the ultimate truth of our humanity.
And I think that's probably the key. That's probably the key to that entire transit.
And it could also be, that those people that decide they want to take on the course or the cause for others who don't have the power to speak for themselves, it could be taking on that crusade.
Yeah.
That actually does have a purpose to it, a higher purpose to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and whatever it is, the combination of those two, I mean, it's a search for meaning. What has meaning and what's worth fighting for, what's worth working towards, what's really worth it, those energies, especially Jupiter and Sagittarius. I mean, it demands meaning.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be a deeper meaning, but what that meaning actually is probably what's up for debate in that revealing through that aspect.
Yeah. Well, I think that the more we've seen like shadow in societies in the world, then we also see light. They say when shadow constellates, light constellates as well.
Yeah.
So it could be even these forces of light and dark.
Yeah, which would really, because we can't have one without the other, maybe we'll start to actually appreciate the wholeness more, which is that it's all there. Always there's an idea of expansion there, but I feel like it's with vision. It's like it's almost like we've been looking at things too narrowly. There's a wider angle to look at, and I think that's really what that reflects. And I think most of us know it. I think a lot of us know we've been narrow-minded.
Mm-hmm.
I know my tendencies, and I like to think of myself as a really free thinker.
Yeah, I can say that I have been illuminated on many fronts of my ignorance, like straight up ignorance, not even willful, not intentional, but just being ignorant of things. I know the first tendency, again, is we want to build walls and shut it out, but there's no shutting out Neptune, and a square can always bring a potential for, some kind of creative solution. It's asking for a creative solution. That's that crisis in action.
Yeah.
Where we need to do something. It's like we need to do something about our future, about where we feel like humanity is heading. And you know what? I think it's so important to have, like you said, to have a vision, because this is the thing. He who has the vision, that vision is what can speak to people's minds and hearts. If we're just working against something, if we're like, no, we don't want that, then you're not pulling out, a vision forward. You're not being magnetized towards something.
No, and I think in some respects, I will be the first to admit that I have these days I've kept up less and less with what's going on in the world, but I feel like we haven't had those same sort of inspirational figures. I mean, as you were talking about the vision, I was thinking about John Lennon's Imagine, right? We all listen to that song and everyone knows, I mean, you can't miss that vision. And I feel like on some level, we need a rekindling of that, maybe a different version. We're in a different age or different time, but that's the thing, right? Like, I absolutely agree with you. Vision inspires people, and people need inspiration. They need to see to believe, and we haven't really collectively, I'm speaking to all of us, we haven't given each other really a lot to really believe in lately.
Mm-hmm. Well, this, it could potentially be like, now is the time that we realize how vital that is. It's not just dreaming or escapism, it's having a vision that actually is meant to make a change possible, a change in the direction where we want things to go.
Yeah, and it really starts by, like we talk about Neptune transits in our own chart, or these ones, going on for all of us, and the collective chart it starts by, giving room for our dreams, sharing our dreams. When you share your dreams, no matter how silly you might think they are or unreasonable you think they are, when someone shares their dreams with you, it's exciting. How it feels when someone comes to you and says, I am so excited about this thing I'd love to do. Even if you think that it couldn't come true, it doesn't matter. There's a level of that just to me at least, gets me excited about life. When someone is that excited about something and they put that passion into it, with Neptune, we don't have to worry too much about the details yet. That's going to come later. But you got to first get it in people's hearts so that they want to go for that. And I think that is really maybe this square is all about inspiration
and faith, hopefully a renewal of faith in some way, because there's beliefs and then there's faith. Faith is inexplicable. Something resonates with your soul, or with your sense of destiny, that you say yes to it. And hopefully we'll have more of that I think it's just more and more of this metaphysical work coming out into the collective, I think is beautiful. I think it's speaking to the fact that people know that there is more to life. We each are magic, we each carry the potential of magic. And that's what I love to see about all these women supporting each other and what they're doing, and, supporting each other's magic. And because it's something that we need now when there's so much uncertainty.
Oh yeah, me too. I mean, that inspires me. And then when we're all doing that, that's a whole new creation of magic, and I think that we underestimate sometimes the power of what we can do when we each do our seemingly small part and share it and bring it together. I think we underestimate it. And I'm excited to see how we can grow more of that.
Well, I'm excited for you, Tara. I wish I was going to NORWAC in Seattle to see your talk. I'm not making it this year, but I know it's going to be awesome. I hear it's sold out. NORWAC's been sold out for months now. So that sounds like a very Jupiter Neptunian thing.
Yeah, and I can't remember exactly. I think there's a very high percentage of first-time attenders too.
Wow.
Which is, and so that's exciting for the world of astrology. That we're getting a bunch of newbies. So
good.
But I will miss you. You're of course one of my favorite people to spend time with there. But I know you're busy doing your thing too.
Well, we'll connect. We'll definitely connect. We need to cook something up. We need to cook something up really fun together. So
fantastic! I'm excited.
Yay! Well, thank you, Tara. And people can find you online at your website. What's your website again?
It's taraal.com. TARAAAL.com.
Okay, perfect. I'll have that in the show notes. And I wish you lots of luck and love, and can't wait to see you next time.
Thank you so much, Christina.